thank Nancy and the folks at CDM for inviting us. Myself, Patrick, and Tway, we're actually a team. We work together. It's really a privilege and an honor to be here to celebrate your 50 years of success. So thank you for inviting us. Basically, what you've heard before me is the science of how Amyris created artemisinic acid and artemisinin in gory detail. I promise I will not talk about science. I'm not a scientist. And then Tway talked to you about how we moved that particular piece of science forward with the project called the artemisinin project to get to semi-synthetic artemisinin as a product that will be used in the marketplace this year. What I'm going to talk about is next steps. And in broader terms, how do you do this with partnerships? Because that's what that was all about, a partnership. No one of those entities could have accomplished what we accomplished together alone. And everyone in those partnerships compromised in some way to ensure that what we got for the greater good, we got together. So that's the important part about partnerships. We're going to talk a lot about partnerships. Let's talk about why Amyris did what they did and the benefits they got from it. Then we'll talk about other potential partnerships. And then we'll talk a little bit about Zagaya. Zagaya is a very, very new nonprofit. We're not associated with Amyris, except that the founders of Amyris have provided some funding, which is always important, the soft money. And we're also sharing technology, which is very nice. And we're sharing technology with other partners, which is how we're establishing what we get done. You've heard a lot about Amyris from Patrick. This is a picture of the timeline of Amyris, and that actually is their first office. Amyris employees worked in the coffee house in Berkeley for a long time before they actually got off the ground. Very typical of virtual companies. What's important about this is once Amyris got started and they partnered with One World Health and with the Gates Foundation, they were actually able to use their technology along with technology from UC Berkeley. Both Amyris and UC Berkeley were giving things up. It was very unusual for a university to allow their technology to be used without a cost. So this is a very unique partnership. Berkeley allowed intellectual property to be used by all of the partners in this partnership without charging them. Big step for universities. And in partnering going forward, you'll find that that's one of the big roadblocks when you work with universities. They don't want to give up their technology. They want to own it. If you're working towards something for the greater good, you need to think about that. Do you have to own it? Do you have to make a profit from it? How else can you do it? In this case, Berkeley gave it up for the greater good. It was a good move on their part. Amyris did the same. The technology that they actually invented in their company, they gave to the project at no cost. So, partnering is important. So let me go to the next timeline, which is a little more specific about UC Berkeley and Amyris. So Amyris was virtual very early on. They had multiple ways of getting funded. There were the standard NIH grants. UC Berkeley provided money, and there were a couple of very ambitious and dedicated individuals who gave money as well. And then the Gates grant came along, and the folks at Amyris completed their milestones. Another thing about partnerships, very early on, all the partners need to agree on exactly what the deliverables and the milestones will be. Otherwise, you cannot be successful. If you can't agree on that up front, you won't achieve them. So in the beginning, the team, it took work, it wasn't easy, agreed on all the milestones and deliverables, and Amyris delivered. And then they could actually step away from the partnership and focus on what they needed to focus on, which was creating their own business and company. The agreement in the partnership was that the technology they developed and gave to the malaria project could be used in other ways. That's the platform they use now for renewable chemicals, biofuels, and other synthetic chemicals. That has allowed them to become a public company with use of venture capital money. Let me back up. Whoops. Oh, I'm really messing up. Sorry about that. There. So I think it was late 2010, Amyris actually became a publicly traded company. They're on the stock exchange. They have shareholders they have to answer to, and now they have a real company. All of this was accomplished through the initial partnership and the initial funding from the Gates Foundation. So very important outcome from a partnership. Amherst would not exist if it were not for this partnership. So let's talk about other partnerships. They're not new. They've been around for a long time. Many of you in this room have been part of public-private partnerships in the past. Private sector, who are we talking about? For-profit companies, pharma, biotech, other industries. Not-for-profit, charities, foundations, anyone who's kind of in business to do good. Public sector, international organizations, development aid agencies, governments, and academia. So public-private partnerships have been around for a long time. They've been difficult. That's why there hasn't been a lot of them in the past. That is changing. Traditionally, and I know some of you in the room were involved in one of this original partnership, public-private partnership for drug development. The Walter Reed Institute, TDR, and Roche created one of the original malaria drugs, mefloquine. And maybe some of you here were involved in that. Again, that was, Walter Reed was a military group in the U.S. TDR is part of WHO, and Roche, again, is a pharmaceutical company. They together worked to make sure that this could happen. It was a very specific partnership tailored to get one thing done. Now, some of the newer models, we're going to talk about this a little bit. PDPs or product development partnerships, very similar. You'll find that in the last 10 years or so, people now want to have partnerships that make a difference. So a social venture capital model to develop products. We want to actually be good to the earth, to ourselves, to our children. So there's a difference now about how we partner. The other difference is everyone's funding. We're not only relying on government or only on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Everyone is ponying up here because we all want to be a part of that. So the partnerships are a little bit different. Now you'll also see, and you saw this when Ken talked about it, the partnerships run the gamut from research, very basic research, all the way through marketing and commercialization of a product. That's also very different. So that means that everyone has to have different skill sets. And we have to have partners who bring to the table skill sets we don't have. And you have to recognize what those are and be very honest about them. So we now collaborate with lots of different partners and funders. I like this quote, Bill Drayton, the CEO of Ashoka, who was one of the premier, I think one of the top 10 non-government organizations, very, very involved in social entrepreneurship. The inertia of our experience pulls us into conventional directions. Engaging in group entrepreneurship allows us to collaborate and become far greater than the sum of our parts. I firmly believe this. To be honest, partnering is a lot like marriages. Marriage is very hard. You have to work at it every day and nurture it every day. You have to do the same thing with your partnerships, or they will just wither away. This is a brief model about what we're talking about. And I apologize for the word old school. I'm old, I can get away with saying that. But old school corporations are companies that were in business to make money, to make their shareholders successful. Bottom line was all that mattered. Anything else pretty much didn't make a difference. Old school not-for-profits, they were in there to do good. Their heart was in the right place. Money wasn't an issue. Structure wasn't an issue. Function wasn't an issue. Delivery wasn't an issue. We just needed to do good. Those are kind of old models. Was it that extreme? Probably not. I'm making a point. And where was academia in all of this? Kind of out there. They didn't quite fit in either of these models. Did we try to work with them? Sure. Were we successful? Not always. They're tough. We now have a new school, conscientious entrepreneurs. In the last probably 10 or 15 years, this has become much more of a model. And you see it everywhere. You see it in public companies who are trying to be green, right? Where are we getting our toilet paper from? Is it recycled? Those efforts are important, but there's more than that. There is a new generation of kids growing up who think there should be no difference between old school corporations and old school nonprofits. They can be the same company. Why can we not make money and do good at the same time? We can. But in the U.S., it's very difficult to do so. And Ken talked about this. If you're a nonprofit, there are things you cannot do because you will jeopardize your nonprofit status. And it's very directly related to your tax status. So, for example, if I have a store and I sell goods related to my company, and my income from that store is more than 15 or 20% of my income that year, I will lose my nonprofit status. Even though all the money I'm making, I'm putting right back into pay for overhead, infrastructure, things that grants won't fund. That causes a problem for me, so I can't do that. In the U.S., we have a new way of looking at things. It's called a B Corp. And Stanford has this HTTP address here is a Stanford magazine article. They have a wonderful group that does social innovation and talks with social entrepreneurs and pulls them all together. This article is very specifically about a company in Kentucky who has decided to become a B Corp. A B Corp in the U.S. now allows you to be for-profit and nonprofit without losing your status of either. So tax-wise, the IRS is not quite sure where to put you yet, but they've established that a B Corp can exist. And it's in, unfortunately, only some states. Not everyone has adopted this. But this article is actually very interesting because it's from the perspective of the first company in Kentucky who has become a B Corp and what that meant for them, the pros and the cons. It's not straightforward, it's not easy, and there's a lot of questions to answer yet, but it is a move in the right direction, and that's where we want to go. What are we talking about when we talk about social entrepreneurship? It's a lot of different things, what I call blended values. Corporate social responsibility. Big companies now know they need to pay attention to the environment, to their employees, to their communities, and they're doing that. Maybe not as dramatically as we'd like to see, but they'll get there. It's baby steps, and they're moving in the right direction. Social enterprise, social investing, socially responsible investing. Where are you putting your money when you hold it before you spend it? We're careful about where we do that now, right? We're not investing it in banks who cause the economic crisis, are we? So how do we invest our money? And then how do we invest socially? More and more companies are actually very invested in their communities, which is really important. You live, you work there. Why are we not taking care of the needs in our community first? Well, we should be. A good example, which is one that Amherst does, they actually have scientists weekly tutoring in the facility local high school kids who need help in science and math. So every week, folks give up their time, bring these kids into the cafeteria, and spend a lot of time with them to make sure they'll be successful in science and math. That's a good thing for your community. Sustainable development. The long-term goal is that this is not a flash in the pan. It is not supposed to be a trend. We're in this for the long haul because your kids are in this for the long haul, and your grandkids, my grandkids, are in this for the long haul. It needs to be sustainable. It's not just okay for tomorrow. It has to be okay for forever. So how do you think about doing business for forever? Some examples of partnerships, and you've seen these. The Global Alliance for TB, HIV, and AIDS, lots of different partners involved, lots of very diverse partners involved. Does it work? Rollback malaria, same thing. There's a lot of politics around global health. Those of you who work in global health know this. There's a lot of politics, there's a lot of difficulty working in different countries, but we can overcome that. It takes time, it takes the right people, it takes the right partnerships, but we can do it. A unique example, I'm going to bring up the Artemisinin Enterprise. Patrick and Tway talked about the Artemisinin Project, which was one part of the enterprise. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation decided to take a portfolio approach to help solve the malaria problem. So what they did was take 3 different approaches. You heard about the one with the Artemisinin Project, which was semi-synthetic artemisinin coming out of the lab. They also worked with, or funded, University of York, down here. University of York has been developing higher yield plants. The goal was that if the semi-synthetic didn't work, we would put better plants in the ground and have higher yields so that when you do harvest them, you're getting more. That actually has been very successful. But those of you who've worked with plants at all know that what works in the greenhouse doesn't always work so well in the field, and they found that as well. Definitely higher yielding plants, not always successful depending on where they planted. And in addition, there was another group that was part of this portfolio approach, which was Medicines for Malaria Venture. They were working on fully synthetic compounds as drugs. One of them is now in phase 2, so again, a successful approach. So Gates was betting on a portfolio approach that at least one would work, and basically they all worked, and they can all be utilized. So in terms of an investment, very, very good investment, very good return on your investment. Let me talk a little bit about history for malaria. You guys have worked in malaria, many of you know how difficult it is. We did eradicate malaria. We've done this already. From 1955 to 1969, WHO and the CDC in the U.S. worked very hard at eradication, and it worked. It also caused some other problems. I also want to thank our partners, UCSF, the Global Health Group, with Sir Richard Peacham. They've allowed us to share these slides with you, which I think are pretty fascinating. In 1900, all these countries in red had malaria transmission. The countries in green didn't. This is in 1900, a little more than 100 years ago, not very long. 1970, we have eliminated malaria in the green countries. How do we do that? DDT. You guys know that was a lot of spraying, and it was a lot of eliminating standing water. There was a huge concerted effort to make this happen, but it happened. You don't see malaria in these areas anymore. Now in 1990, it's expanded. So we're actually being very successful. But this is 2011. The light green, of course, there's no malaria. The red definitely have malaria. And the darker green are countries that have plans in place, are close to elimination, and are successfully implementing those plans. So this looks a lot different than the map in 1900. But the big issue here is, why do we still have red when you know you can eliminate? I know eliminate was a bad word a couple years ago. Eradicate was a bad word. But I think we've come a long way and realized that with the multi-pronged approach, it's not one solution. It's a multi-pronged approach, and it's multiple partners working together to make this happen. This is the challenge. I won't go into this in too much detail because both Tuay and Patrick talked about this. The current production for artemisinin comes from plants, and this is a very, very difficult supply chain. Thousands of farmers plant, people extract, there's manufacturers of the API, and then there's formulators of the API, of the actual drugs. All along this supply chain, there are issues. There are ways to improve this supply chain, and that's actually what Zagaia is focused on. Can we do things better, faster, cheaper? Can we apply technology to any of these parts to make them better? That's what we're looking at. So we have a global strategy. Everyone's working towards this. Control, eliminate, and eradicate malaria. The whole point is that we need to identify our populations and locations that are at risk, and then put the controls in place, and then sustain them over time. You all know that it takes money to sustain these processes and these procedures. And with the current economic crisis, and folks who are part of the Global Fund and not actually participating by putting their money in the Global Fund, means that we're going to have some problems with funding in the long run. So it's important that we fund malaria control, elimination, and eradication. This is what we were talking about all day this morning, were ACTs. The production of artemisinin, semi-synthetic artemisinin, to be part of ACT, so we can actually be part of the cure. These drugs are available now. They will be available with semi-synthetic artemisinin shortly, but it's not the only way you can eliminate malaria. We have to take care of insecticides in bed nets. We have to be able to diagnose the disease. Right now, if you have a fever in some countries, you're going to get an ACT or an antimalarial of some kind. Do you have malaria? Possibly, but maybe not. So maybe we're misdiagnosing. So it's important to have good diagnostic tests on the ground. And then we have vaccines. We have an effective vaccine. And as you saw in Ken's presentation, a vaccine is not an easy drug to produce. This is pretty tough. The fact that we have one that's about 50% efficacious is phenomenal. It means we're definitely working in the right direction. Another quote of one of my favorite guys. MYC4 actually does a lot of money lending on the ground in Africa to African entrepreneurs. And his quote is, "Business must be for profit, but profit must also be for a purpose." And we firmly believe that. Why should we work together? It's been tough for pharma companies. Okay, I know they make a ton of money, but it has been tough for them. They have to answer to the street. They won't work in the developing world because there's no market. And it's tough to work in the developing world. Regulations are difficult. Getting supplies and drugs into the country is difficult. So they don't want to work there. They have shareholders they have to answer to. They have the street they have to answer to. They have to manage their risks very conservatively. That's not their fault. That's the business model. Old-time pharmaceutical companies, people that have been around in business for a long time, the Roches, the Sanofi-Aventis, they have actually set up separate foundations. They want to do good, but they can't allow it to impact their bottom line. So they set up foundations, and they do all their philanthropic work through their foundation. That's great. It works well. You have to have a lot of money to do that. They fund those foundations too. The rest of us in nonprofit don't have that luxury. So we have a lot of government groups and NGOs, nonprofits, not-for-profits, other companies who are out there trying to do good. What they don't have in many cases is expertise. How many of us have worked in nonprofits where you have lots of really good MDs, really good clinicians, really good researchers? You don't, because you can't pay them enough. So it's really tough to get the expertise you want in-house. You can't pay for it. So you have to collaborate and you have to partner to get it. But as a nonprofit or an NGO, we can often accept a higher profile risk than the more conservative partners that we're dealing with. And so sometimes it makes sense to partner for that. Our risk profile is a little bit easier to deal with. And the other thing is, people who are giving us a lot of money, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, DFID, all the big guys, we're talking a lot of money, millions and millions and millions of dollars. They want to make sure that we deliver. It's not very much to ask. We haven't all been very good about that in the past, but it's important that we do. So when you get money, it's not yours. You can't treat it like it's yours. You treat it like it's somebody else's, and you're careful with it. And you make sure that what you do is the right thing to do, and you get it done on time, under budget. That's your goal. They want to maximize their bang for their buck. They're not going to give you money if you waste it. So that's why partnering makes a lot of sense. When you look at the partnership with Amherst, One World Health, UC Berkeley, and Sanofi, everyone brought something different. One World Health had oversight expertise, management, project management, fiscal responsibility. That worked. That allowed the scientists at Amherst to pay attention to just the science. Really important. They couldn't have got where they got if they were busy worrying about the budget and the monthly reports and the annual reports. UC Berkeley brought the primary science to the table, and then they gave it away. Really important. And then Sanofi came on board to fill in a huge gap. We did not know how to scale up. We did not know how to actually commercialize a product. We really didn't know. We knew we could make it in the lab. We knew we could make it at a slightly larger scale, but making it on a big scale, tons, did we have a clue what that was? Mm-mm. So Amherst and One World Health actually worked together, did due diligence, looked at all the right people, and chose Sanofi. And they chose us. And it was a good partnership. They could do what we needed them to do. So maximizing your dollars. There's a real reason we should be working together. We're in a global economy. It's a very, very, very diverse economy, very diverse world. We all work globally now. You can see by looking around the room, people are from everywhere in the world. There's no reason why we can't do this. So Zagaia, I'm going to do a little self-promotion here. Zagaia actually is based on an old word called asagai, which means spear, and technology will be our spear to attack all of those problems in the developing world. What do we want to do? Improve the human condition through the targeted application of science-based technology and education. That is a real mouthful for a mission, and that's what you get when a group of people develops a mission. I prefer innovation for the greater good. We want to make sure that the technology that was originally developed is accessible and affordable. We will work with all of those partners and new partners going forward to ensure that everyone can get that drug when they need it at the right price. How do we get there? ACTs should be, as many drug products are now, low margin, high volume. When you have enough drug to go around and then some, it's a high volume. Will people have to pay a lot for it? Because it's always there. It hasn't always been there. That's been the problem. So we want to reduce cost of manufacturing. We want to reduce packaging costs. We want to reduce distribution. Right now, when drug comes into Africa, sometimes it costs 90 cents to $1 to actually get to the shore. Sometimes when it gets to the patient, it's $6 or $7, which is completely unacceptable. We want to make sure that we can help there. The other big thing, which I know bothers me a lot, is I don't want to have to depend on global subsidies. I don't think we can count on them in the long term. Drugs should cost what they cost. You shouldn't have to rely on somebody else to pay for them. So AMFM is a wonderful pilot, and it's a great example, and it is working in many ways, and it's pointing out lots of things for us. But do we have to rely on it forever? We shouldn't. We shouldn't have to. We want to make sure everybody has enough product for the world need, and we want to make sure that lots of partners have access to this technology. The biggest burden from malaria is in Africa. Why are we not making drugs in Africa? I know, it's hard. It's really hard to work there, but we can. That's where they need us to be. So how do we fund this? You guys brought this up earlier when Ken was up here, and it's a really important important issue. Funding is tough. If you constantly have to, every year, go out and beg for money, because that's what it is, folks, we're begging, you're not going to get what you need. It's really tough. So there are some other ways to do this. In the U.S. anyway, nonprofits are allowed to actually spin off wholly owned subsidiaries. So if I have a partner who's working with us on a very unique technology who wants to actually make some money, I don't want to make money, I want that technology available to me to use in the developing world, we can set up a wholly owned subsidiary, an arm's length away for a nonprofit that won't threaten my nonprofit status, but will allow us to actually do work together. And they may get what they need, but we'll get what we need. So JVs and subsidiaries will actually allow you to develop partnerships to the next level. We have to ensure, and this is one of the things I think Tway forgot to mention, one of the big pluses that Sanofi brought to the table was registration. Sanofi has had a lot of drugs in the marketplace. They know how to deal with regulatory agencies. And this is it's not a new drug, but it's a new starting material. So it's semi-synthetic, which has always been planned. Sanofi has worked overtime with the regulators and with WHO to ensure that the semi-synthetic will be acceptable. We need partners who can do that. Because those of you who have worked with the WHO, they're not a regulatory agency, but they act like one. They make our life very difficult. So we have to deal with the WHO and the EMA and the FDA. And that means a lot of work and, as you know, a lot of expense. So we have to partner to get this done. And again, local communities and governments, if you're working in a community and you're not working with the people in the community and the officials in the community, you won't get anything done. They won't accept you. You have to make sure that you're on the ground working with people there. It's a partnership. And Americans are notoriously bad about this. We've come into many countries and told them it's our way or the highway. That didn't work very well, did it? Well, it didn't work in the U.S., not for the Indians. Anyway, I can say that. I'm part Indian. So alliances. You have to partner with the people you're working with. You have to work with your communities. We've talked about this a little bit outside the meeting. Culture plays a really important part here, right? You have to accept other cultures. You have to understand other cultures. But how many of us have had cultural training to work with our partners? Considering that I don't speak Spanish, not enough. Anyway, important things. Lots of ways to work around this. And I'm going to do a shameless promotion on World Malaria Day, which all of us work hard to utilize to raise funds and also raise awareness. We're going to sponsor a Bay Area symposium. Hopefully it will be as successful and well-run as this one with our partners, the Global Health Group at UCSF, because there are a lot of researchers in the Bay Area, Stanford, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, Stanford, UCSF, who aren't talking to each other. Maybe through journals. That's the only time they actually reach out to each other. But we want a forum where people who are working in malaria can actually get in a room and talk about what they're doing and collaborate more and share. The sharing part is hard. Their companies and their universities don't like them to share without a written agreement, right? Confidentiality agreements. So that's something we're going to have to work really hard on. But just having a forum where people can meet and talk about their work is critical. So, enough promotion. If you're in the Bay Area, April 25th in San Francisco, call me. I'll make sure you have a seat at the table. So it's a global coalition. We all have to work together to make sure that we can cure malaria. It involves everyone. Entrepreneurs, there are a lot of really neat folks out there with great ideas. They come up all the time. When you look at the use of cell phone technology in Africa and India and what people are doing with cell phones, there is a microscope. There's a cell phone that's been adapted to actually hold a microscope lens, so you can actually do on the ground real-time analysis of is your blood infected. This is pretty cool stuff. So we want those folks to have access. The guy is very interested in technology, and we want to make sure that people who have good ideas can see them come to fruition. So that's really one of our goals. But again, in order to help with malaria in Africa, it's going to take a lot of players, a lot of time, and real, true partnership. I just want to thank, there's a guy aboard. We have an interim board of directors who've been very helpful with us and helped us get started. We have a lot of volunteers. I have to thank them. And we have some donors. Thank you very much to our donors. And thank you very much for letting us be here.